Hello and welcome back to Vietnam Real Estate Insights, the program that looks at the Vietnam real estate market and the emerging trends for investment with leading industry experts. I'm your host, Harlow Russell. Today on Vietnam Real Estate Insights, we have David Lim, the managing partner for ZICO Law Vietnam, and we'll be discussing the opportunities and the challenges of investing your money in the Vietnamese marketplace. So let me give you a brief background about David. Now, David is a Malaysian citizen, but has been here in Vietnam for more than 12 years. He is a well-known figure in the legal area, as well as an advisor for many foreign investment companies on a wide range of industries, including real estate. He focuses on mergers and acquisitions, private equity, and is truly an expert in how to do business in Vietnam. So I'm very happy to have him here today. David, by the way, graduated from the University of Warwick in the UK. David, great to see you here. Thanks for your time to join us.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Okay, for our viewers who are mostly outside of Vietnam, they may not be familiar with ZICO Law and its presence in Vietnam or the region. So could you give a little bit of background about ZICO for our global audience?
Okay. ZICO, we're a regional law firm. We're an ASEAN law firm. We are in 8 of the 10 ASEAN countries. 15 officers, about 300 lawyers across the region. In Vietnam, we set up the Ho Chi Minh City office in 2012 and the Hanoi office in 2014. In Hanoi, I have a partner who is Vietnamese, and she has more than 20 years experience. She's a banking and finance expert. She engages regularly with the Ministry of Finance, the State Bank of Vietnam. So we're very well covered in terms of banking and finance expertise, in addition to our real estate expertise as well. Altogether now about 20 people, 2 partners, 15 lawyers, and we continue to grow on an organic and steady basis. We are most well recognized for our real estate work, our banking and finance work, as I mentioned before, M&A transactions, that kind of thing. In the last 2 years, we've been awarded Real Estate Law Firm of the Year from the in-house community publication. Hopefully, we'll win that award again this year, fingers crossed. So it's something that we're very proud of, the work that we do in the real estate sector. And in addition to that, I'll add that I sit on the land subgroup of the Vietnam Business Forum. This is a World Bank initiative for ongoing dialogue between the government and also private business, the private business community in Vietnam about policies and decisions affecting business in Vietnam, basically. And through that, I was involved in the drafting of the land law and also the residential housing law, the real estate business law. So that's been an opportunity for me to be involved and influence some of those decisions and some of the policies relating to the real estate sector in general.
Wow, well, that's very important and useful for our audience because a lot of the laws changed 2014, 2015, right. And that's why they're watching this today. So we'll perhaps touch on that a little bit later in the interview. Well, you advise a lot of companies who want to, quote, invest in Vietnam. And when companies or organizations say, David, we want to invest and we like real estate, what's the Vietnamese real estate market like? How do you define the market here and basically give global investors an initial view of what the market is like here?
Okay, I think the real estate market is actually quite well developed. I mean, we've got all the separate different sectors that most global investors are interested in. We've got industrial property, we've got residential, commercial, hospitality, infrastructure. So we've actually got quite developed business sectors already. And the reality is, in all of these sectors, there are actually no restrictions for foreign investors at all. So it's completely open, and if at all there were a joint venture, it would have been because it was something that was probably a legacy thing from the past. When foreign investors first came to Vietnam years ago, they were actually required to enter into joint ventures with designated Vietnamese companies. But over time, that requirement has been removed. So what we've seen is a lot of these joint ventures have been converted into wholly foreign-owned projects, and of course, the new projects under the new laws are all have wholly foreign-owned structures. Really? So again, there are no restrictions. It's actually quite open. The only thing that the other thing I would add is the foreign investors in general. They in Vietnam actually own land on a leasehold basis, and that's something that a lot of people don't realize, because I think when they're comparing Vietnam with other markets, in other countries, you may not actually have ownership rights. You may have lease rights or something of that sort. But in Vietnam, all foreign invested companies who are developing property would have actual ownership of the land on which they're developing. So they would own the land on a leasehold basis, typically 50 years, and when you come to the end of the term, you have a right to extend that duration as well. And when you have this ownership right of 50 years, you have all the rights as if you were an owner. You could mortgage it, you could contribute it as capital, full rights basically.
Really?
So
I wasn't aware of that. I thought there were restrictions, particularly on industrial land as well as just raw land ownership.
Well, that's a good point that you highlight. I mean, a foreign investor cannot buy land purely for the purpose of trading land. So you wouldn't be able to buy and sell land. Okay. But you would be able to acquire land for an investment purpose. And an investment purpose is not confined to a real estate development purpose only. It could be because you are building a factory on it, so you're using the land for that purpose. You could be, for any investment reason. But so the prohibition only relates to where you are buying and selling land.
I see.
So that aside, there really is no restriction.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. So if I'm a foreign corporation and I'm looking at potentially wanting to manufacture in Vietnam, and particularly with TPP hopefully coming, there's supposedly more American companies and some of the European trade agreements, more European companies that want to consider manufacturing here. So would generally you advise a manufacturer that's looking to set up here to also consider buying the land at this point for that factory versus a default, which is, this is a foreign country, you'll have to lease the land, or you cannot own the land. What generally, from a very high level view, would you advise a new manufacturer coming into Vietnam about that? Okay,
so basically for a manufacturer coming to Vietnam, to lease the land is right, because that's actually how a foreign investor receives land. So they would enter into a lease if they were going to take ownership of the land with the state, right? So there is a lease agreement, but that lease agreement gives the foreign manufacturer leasehold ownership rights, as opposed to where you were just a lessee, like a tenant, right? So you would be able to do that. You would be able to enter into a lease with the state and then have full ownership rights over the land and then exercise the rights which I mentioned before. You could collateralize it, you could again contribute as capital, and you could transfer it at the end of your project as well. So you would be able to do that, and a lot of people actually do that today. Similarly, if you like a more established setup, you can go to an industrial park. Yes. Which would typically be, there will be an industrial park operator. So they would then sign a lease with the manufacturer, again, granting them the rights over the land. So it would be akin to actually owning the land, to be honest. It's not very different in that sense.
Are industrial parks here popular, rising in popularity, neutral, decreasing in terms of, again, foreign manufacturers or foreign companies looking to set up here? What's the would you say, the general status of industrial parks in Vietnam?
I think it's definitely on the uptrend. I mean, if first of all, I mean, we've had the first, we won't even call it the first wave. We've had the wave of Japanese manufacturers and the Korean manufacturers who came to Vietnam on the back of maybe 2 or 3 years, just leading up to now. And of course, you hear about the Samsungs, and you hear about the other manufacturers like themselves, producers who have come to Vietnam, and so we saw a huge demand for industrial property. And of course, when you're running a more sophisticated manufacturing facility, you really need to have good infrastructure. Yes. You need to know that your electricity is going to be constant. You need to know that it's going to be here tomorrow and the day after. Yes. You need, and that's quite critical to ensure that your investment is successful. So for that kind of manufacturer, an industrial park is the obvious choice because these things will be taken care of by someone else with a good reputation. It's a little bit more expensive than if you were to get land on your own, but the returns are obvious. So on the back of that, with the TPP coming on board, hopefully in the next few years, like you say, again, we expect that there's going to be a new wave of investors. You're going to have manufacturers who are in non-TPP countries look at relocating. You're going to have investors who are not in Vietnam looking at setting up. You're going to have investors who are in Vietnam who want to expand to take advantage of the benefits of the TPP. So again, industrial really is, I think, the one area where, well, not the one, but one of the areas where we expect to see a growth in, a lot of growth, more demand, and hopefully more supply as well. And in fact, if you look at the recent reports, you'll find that the existing industrial park operators, they have recently announced some big projects, you know, and really sizable projects as well. And again, it's in anticipation of this additional influx of investment expected from these trade agreements.
Let's go back to more somewhat generically the residential property market. From your perspective, from a legal perspective, can you kind of give our viewers a sense of what's happened in the last 12 months or so in relation to investing in property here in Vietnam?
Well, we kind of alluded to it earlier about, you know, the changes in the laws, and I think that's really significant. And not everyone fully understands what's actually happened or how important it is. But as you mentioned before, the two new laws, the residential housing law and the law on real estate business, passed in 2014 but taking effect on 1st July 2015.
Yes.
So effectively what those laws did was that for the first time it allowed non-resident foreigners to buy property, residential property in Vietnam.
Yes.
Right. So prior to 1st July 2015, there was a right to buy property, but it was only available to resident foreigners. So a foreigner would have a right to be resident in Vietnam for a year or more, and would only be allowed to buy one residential apartment unit, and only for residential purpose, residential use only. So under the new laws, a foreigner that's allowed to enter Vietnam. So this is a right of entry as opposed to a right of residency.
I see, yes.
Okay, so there's a significant difference.
Much simpler, much easier. I mean,
and a lot wider.
Almost all of our viewers can come to Vietnam
Yes.
and therefore could buy property.
Correct. And all that would be necessary was a proof of a stamp on a passport. So quite easily achieved. And for this foreigner, they would be allowed to buy unlimited number of apartments and also for the first time landed property. So you're looking at villas, you're looking at townhouses, which were previously not available to foreigners. And in addition to that, there's no longer the restriction on residential use only. So you would be able, for instance, to buy and then lease it out.
Lease it out, yes.
You know, to use it for other purposes as well. So it's a significant change.
Significant
really.
change,
Yeah.
okay. And has your firm seen an uptick in interest and query about buying property from foreign investors in the last 12 months?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, all the time, in fact. I think quite regularly we have not just individuals. I mean, we get a lot of queries from developers as well, who now want to take advantage of, you know, a new group of potential buyers. So we're talking through what exactly these rights are, how will they be implemented. And I think if you look at the numbers out there of residential buyers, you'll see that the foreign participation has increased
yes.
over this period of time.
Yes. So we've touched on a lot of things that are allowing foreign investors to buy here. We've touched briefly on TPP, which is a major economic factor. Are there some other reasons from your perspective that a foreign investor who may be watching should put Vietnam on his or her radar screen to look at purchase versus other developing countries around the world, or specifically in Southeast Asia? What's really any other drivers that you would say are reasons to consider buying in Vietnam?
So I think, you know, on the back of the TPP,
Yes.
where the benefits are really quite obvious, and there's all this talk about how Vietnam is expected to be the country, the one of the 12 that will benefit the most, from the TPP arrangements. We've also at the same time closed on the discussions on the EU-Vietnam for a free trade agreement, and we can expect greater engagement with European investors and trade with European companies as well. And on top of that, we should add on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership.
What is that exactly?
The RCEP for short, but basically it's the trade agreement which between the 10 ASEAN countries and her trade partners, most notably China. So of all the trade agreements that we've talked about before, this is the one, China is not a member of any of those.
Yes.
So in the RCEP, China would be a member. So again, the RCEP is important for that reason, and there is, I think, a big push towards seeing that come through as well. So again, Vietnam is the one country, well not the one, it's one of a few countries which are in all of these trade agreements. So the obvious benefits arising from being a part of all these agreements will come to pass, I think. And we'll see that, we'll see more and more trade engagement, we'll see more and more businesses, I think, looking at Vietnam as a result. So, and the one last thing I'd like to mention as well, which is also often overlooked, is the AEC, the ASEAN Economic Community.
Okay, and tell us about that.
The ASEAN Economic Community came into effect 31st of December 2015, so right on the last day of 2015. But essentially, it's, it is about trade, it is about a single market, a production base, that kind of thing with the ASEAN countries, the 10 ASEAN countries. And again, often overlooked simply because it's not talked about as much as perhaps some of the other trade agreements.
Yes.
But the reality is, ASEAN combined, the 10 ASEAN countries, 7th biggest economy in the world, 3rd biggest population behind China and India, so the opportunities are really tremendous.
Wow.
So Vietnam is right in the middle of all of that, and is well poised to ride on the, the opportunities that are presented as a result.
I see. Well, we've talked a lot about, benefits, macroeconomic benefits, some microeconomic benefits. Now I'd like to turn the other side to some of the gotchas. and being the first lawyer that I've interviewed, I'd really like to know what's your view for our audience of some of the difficulties, challenges, gotchas of investing in real estate, whether it's residential or otherwise, here in Vietnam.
I want to be careful not to turn off all your viewers, but you're right. It's really important to talk about the gotchas because it's easy to get carried away with, the hype.
Yes.
And forget that in everything that we do, I mean, it's important to understand the advantages, the disadvantages, the pros and cons. So that's a really good question, Harlow. There are a few things that investors need to be careful about. I think the one I would probably spend a bit of time on is really, it's important to understand how to invest in Vietnam. And to be careful about investments, getting all the information that is necessary about investing, understanding the rules and regulations, understanding the rules about bringing money into the country, taking money out of the country, understanding what restrictions apply. I'll give you an example. We've talked about how foreigners can buy property, but it's important to know as well that there are restrictions on purchases as well. For instance, in an apartment building, only 30% maximum foreigners can buy. So if already 30% of the units are sold to foreigners, regardless of the fact that you have a right to buy, you would not be allowed to buy. You would not be able to get the ownership certificate. So it's important to establish that that 30% has not been breached, for instance, and there are ways to do that. And also, I mentioned a little bit about money coming in and money coming out. We have foreign exchange restrictions in Vietnam. We have strict rules about how money leaves the country. So the efforts need to be made to ensure that the money coming into the country comes through the right channels, according to the right procedures, to ensure that when it needs to go out, that it's in the right, it has the right channels in place to exit the country as well. So that's really important. And beside that, I think just getting a sense for, the rules of investing in Vietnam.
Well, in terms of money in and out, which is a well-known challenge and opportunity here. From my understanding, it's very, very important to document if you're going to buy, let's say, a property here and bring money in, document it in the proper official ways currently, so that, as you said, perhaps 2, 3, 5 years out when you sell and hopefully make a profit, that documentation has been properly done so that money can be exited out. It's not that it can't be, but it has to be very, very finely documented. Would that be correct?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And there are rules and procedures. I mean, it's not impossible to do. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just being aware of the fact that there are rules to be followed, to get good guidance on that, to engage with the bankers, and then fulfilling those requirements to ensure that you get the full benefits of your investment.
Right. Yeah. Well, on that note, if I'm a foreign investor, whether I'm an individual or perhaps a company, what is the best sort of process to lower my risk if I make a decision that I do want, I want to have part of my portfolio, real estate portfolio, in Vietnam. So what are some particular points to lower my risk as a first-time foreign investor coming to Vietnam?
Okay, I think again, going back to what we've just talked about in terms of understanding the rules and regulations, I think it's important to get good advice from good advisors. And advisors it really isn't just about legal advice. It's about going to your real estate agents. It's about going to people who are active in the industry and understanding what's in the market, getting a good sense of what the rules and regulations are, and once you have those, once you have a good understanding, then you can work within the framework for your investment. So that's important. And at the same time, trying to understand, there are risks which are impossible to eliminate.
Sure. Yes.
There are country risks, there are other risks which an advisor wouldn't be able to eliminate for you. So then it's a question of understanding how you can work around those risks. And if you talk to an experienced consultant, they will often tell you, okay, these are the additional things that you can do. You would be able to, and we talked a little bit about how the money goes into the country. Yes. We want to make sure that it's done clearly and that there are no issues there. And at the same time, if you're paying deposits in advance, the payment mechanisms which are in place to create additional protections for you as an investor. So I think being aware of these measures to protect your investment are important, and then using them in a meaningful way.
Very good. Well, this concludes our interview with David Lim, the managing partner for ZICO Law Vietnam. We hope that you have enjoyed David's expertise. David, thank you so much for your time and sharing with us today. Yeah. Really appreciate it. And hopefully you have found our conversation more useful for your investments as well, wherever you are in the world. Please click on all of the interviews in the series. This is a continuing program about the Vietnamese real estate market and investment each month. I'm your host, Harlow Russell. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.